weeks ago. I've been in sponsorship for 25 years, working originally in-house, then in an agency capacity, which is where I am now. So would like to make the session interactive for you. So I don't know how many of you are involved from or interested from a rights holder side, how many are interested from a brand side, how many are interested from an agency side. So I've tried to balance it so that we cover all three areas as we go through, but please do make sure that you ask me questions, put questions in the chat, or if I don't see you, because I can't necessarily see everybody at the top of the screen here, please just raise a hand and I'll hopefully keep an eye on that, and Ariel and Peggy can keep me on my toes as well, letting me know. So as I said, the agenda this afternoon, we're going to look at the sponsorship industry overall. Then we're going to look at sponsorship from a rights holder perspective, and then sponsorship from a brand perspective. So if you just look at the industry, I think one of the quotes I heard some time ago was that actually sponsorship started back in Roman times. And actually it was the athletes that were effectively sponsored by the nobility in their countries in favour of board and lodging. So that takes us back quite some time. It's evolved quite a lot since that time. So as this description describes from the ICC Advertising and Marketing Communications Code, the definition of sponsorship refers to any commercial agreement by which a sponsor, for the mutual benefit of the sponsor and sponsored party, contractually provides financing or other support in order to establish an association between the sponsor's image, brands and products and a sponsorship property in return for rights to promote this association and for the granting of certain agreed direct or indirect benefits. So if we look at the various parties that are involved in sponsorship, the obvious ones are the rights holder and the brand, as we said. So the rights holder, sometimes they're called rights holders, sometimes they're called property. Obviously the brand themselves, otherwise known as the company. And then obviously they've got their own audiences. So rights holder has an audience, the brand has an audience. The other party that's often involved in sponsorship is agencies like Revolution and my background, as I said earlier. So in essence, sponsorship's a competitive advantage that gives a brand something else that they wouldn't have other than by doing the sponsorship. It's justifiable in benefits, commercially attractive, for strategic purposes, and it's mutually beneficial. And I think that's really the key to sponsorship. It's beneficial to the rights holder and it's beneficial to the brand. So just really some very quick background about regulation. Any forms of marketing need to be regulated. The sponsorship industry is guided by the International Chamber of Commerce and its code of practice. So they're governed by these rules and regulations. This also covers certain things in certain industries like betting or alcohol, used to be cigarettes as well. And obviously there are some regional specifications in terms of regulation as well. But if you ever want to go and look at it, you can find it in the ICC document. So sponsorship has grown quite considerably as an industry over the last, well, it says here 40 years, but I'd say more than that, to be honest. But it's come into its own, I think, in the last 40 years. When I started my business in 2001, there were very few sponsorship agencies around. And over time, that's become prolific. And I think the reasons for that, some of them are listed here, but also I think there's a much better understanding of sponsorship than there ever has been in the market. But in addition to that, I think that with things like TiVo, with advertising being taken out of TV recordings and things like that, people had to find a different way of being able to engage with the audiences and find a different way to get the brand messages across. And sponsorship really is about pressing on the passion points of the audiences and engaging with them, whereas advertising just really speaks at them. Sponsorship is really about an engagement, and it's a two-way street. So I think that's one of the reasons why sponsorship itself has grown significantly over the last 30, 40 years. So apologies, this slide isn't in the corporate colours, but it literally is hot off the press. This was a report that came out from the UK yesterday, effectively day before yesterday, and I got it yesterday, saying that the sponsorship industry is worth, in terms of the deal value, $36.75 billion this year. So that doesn't include media rights and so on and so forth that are also in sort of the bigger industry when we look at the global industry overall. But these are actually the number of rights deals. So this is the number that is being paid by brands to rights holders in the market currently. I think, you know, one of the interesting things down here as well, it says about Asia Pacific makes up only 11% of the deal values, but actually accounts for 22% of the volume, which means that the deal sizes are relatively small in comparison to the rest of the world. But that's not surprising given that APAC is the developing market in the sponsorship perspective. This was the most recent specific information I could find about Asia Pacific, and it talks about sport and other forms of sponsorship. And I think this is one of the things that's interesting. Sport accounts for such a big part of the market, but there are lots of other things that contribute to sponsorship overall, things like charity, things like gaming, culture, music. So those things are starting to, I think, take a bigger hold as well. Here it talks about the fact that non-sport has dropped off very slightly back in the end of 2022, but that sport stayed fairly static. And in the Asia Pacific market, that China has got the most activity around sponsorship. Obviously, big nation, lots going on there. And then followed by, I can't read that, Japan, and then South Korea and India, sort of more flat down at the bottom here. So that just gave you a really fleeting view of the sponsorship industry overall. If we look at what rights holders consider from sponsorship perspective, and just as some examples for you of rights holders. So in a sporting capacity, you can look at people like FIFA, the Olympics, those sorts of properties, Formula One, NBA, different things like that. From an entertainment perspective, things like more local and closer to home for us in Singapore, Sunset Cinema, which has been sponsored this past summer by Hendrix. And then charity, things like Race for Good, sponsored by ING, which I won't swear in front of Erica. So just some examples of the rights holder side. And then when we look at a rights holder is interested in generating revenue from their assets that they have. So if we look at sponsorship packages, I think one of the differences now where the sponsorship market has expanded and progressed and developed is that it used to be standard packages. You could buy this one at this price, this one at this price. I think nowadays everything is done bespoke for the brand. So the understanding of brand objectives, brand needs, and so on and so forth has become much more prevalent in the rights holder world, and they need to be like that in order to compete, because obviously there's only a finite number of dollars from the brands, and making sure that they actually deliver what the brand needs is critical. But this is just an example of the type of structure you might find in any given property, that you might have a title partner, you might have a couple of principal partners, official partners underneath, and then official suppliers. So often with official suppliers, they're supplying products or services that enable the property to operate maybe more efficiently or with different aspects. Official partners can be things like car providers, quite often, but automotive comes quite highly into official partner. And then you go into larger partners, which are more maybe brand driven, and also obviously significantly more in terms of levels of investment. Anybody have any questions while I'm rattling on? No, all good. So when we look at sponsorship inventory, in order to price a sponsorship package, you have to understand the assets that you've got and the value that you've got. And many times the value of an asset is higher when you have a TV audience. So the number of eyeballs often drives up the price of certain assets. So when you've got global properties that have significant TV coverage, like Formula One or like the World Cup and things like that, the value is also driven up by the size of the audience. But in terms of tangible assets, there are things like the official designation and the lockup logo that you end up getting as a partner, whatever level that partnership is. Brand exposure, so that's determined by the size of the audience, but not only the TV audience, but also the in-house audience that you'd have in a venue. And access to print production of things like programs and things like that, where your brand would be seen in a environment. And then you have things like verbal public announcements, access to senior personnel within the rights holder that will come and maybe speak to certain events and be part of events. The size of the fan database, so that's also a very valuable asset that's offered by rights holders. Being able to communicate with the target audience that you're wanting to be associated with or linked with. Obviously, sampling and demo opportunities that come with having, perhaps in a stadium, being able to hand things out or get people to try different things. And then obviously tickets and VIP hospitality that come with a lot of sponsorship rights. On the intangible side, there's lots of things that you don't necessarily always think about. Prestige of the property. So some of the big global properties, like I said, the Olympics, World Cup, things like that, are very prestigious. That carries with it an intangible sort of value. Recognizability and awareness of the property, audience loyalty, the category exclusivity that you're going to get from being in a particular industry or a particular aspect for the partner. All the other different things that we see here, ability to activate, how easy is it for you to leverage those assets that they're going to provide to you? What's the networking opportunity? So these are all things that are much more difficult to put a specific monetary value on, but they contribute to the overall value that's provided by the rights holder to the brand. So when we value a sponsorship package, we would look at the tangible assets, and those are things that we can actually put numbers on. And then we look at the intangible assets, and actually what we do is put multipliers onto the tangible assets based on the things that are on the right-hand side. So that's how sponsorship packages are priced at a very sort of basic level.
Claire, so could I ask a question?
Yeah.
I never really thought about intangible assets in that way. So for example, if you look at your tangible assets, if you talk about brand exposure, right? And you talk about, let's say, a broadcast. Therefore, if your geographical reach is 3 continents, that's how they multiply and see the, okay.
Absolutely, yeah, right. Absolutely.
Okay.
And they put a weighting on it. So you would weight these things, and then you would calculate them based on the weighting.
But things like networking opportunities it's quite difficult to quantify to be a multiplier, right? I mean, some like protection from ambush. How do we quantify the degree of protection from ambush?
Yeah, there's a framework that we would use that gives you certain percentages that you would use to multiply by based on the degree of protection from ambush. So for example, if you have a very, very tight contract that allows you to be completely protected, which obviously things like the Olympics and things do, they're really, really strict, and we'll talk about contracts a bit later on, but those sorts of things, you are very protected from ambush. So that would be a higher value, because your brand is less likely to be diluted by a competitive brand.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions while we're looking at that?
Sorry, hi, Sheng. Yeah, Claire, thanks for this. I wanted to ask, with the digitalization and all, do we see a decrease in demand for some of these tangible assets, especially the physical things like signages and A-boards and all those things?
I think it depends on the property itself. If you're a football sponsor, for example, soccer sponsor, and you've got perimeter advertising on your digital boards, that's still valuable in this day and age. I think there are less things like programs and things like that are sort of, I guess they're going to be digitized now, and so I think it's a shift. But I think it really depends on the actual property as to what it is that is most prevalent. And that's why I've just tried to give you an example here across the board. But some things will be much more digital and some things will be much more print, or visual signage.
Okay, thank you.
It's Paolo.
Hi, Claire. Thank you so much for this. Just curious to get your perspective in why would things like recognizability and awareness or media coverage potential, geographical reach are in the intangible assets, where then the brand exposure are intangible, as they are very relatable, right? So what does it mean? What is the difference then that you see there?
So a brand exposure can actually be measured. So, for example, my background's motorsport, so I'll take a motorsport example because it's easier. So, Red Bull's racing this weekend in Silverstone. Through someone like Nielsen, or one of the other platforms, we can actually know how long the Red Bull logo and name was on the TV for during any given broadcast. So that is the actual tangible. We know that, and that can be measured specifically. But then you come on to the reach of that and the recognizability and those sorts of things. So there's an element that is how how well known is the property, is the brand, and there's a multiplier that goes into that. So Formula One, for example, is recognized globally. It is one of the highest echelons of sport. So there's a tangible quantifier, an intangible quantifier there that will then go against the broadcast that will multiply up.
Claire, the next question would be, who determines the equation, the formula, or the multiply effect?
Yeah, so we've worked a lot in the past with IEG. So they used to be the sort of governor of sponsorship, and they basically used to run a yearly conference in the US. They also used to produce a lot of content around the sponsorship industry. And it's funny because I went to my team in the US to say I can't find a global sponsorship value current. And they said that since IEG have stopped doing that, it's very difficult to find. So IEG, I guess, were the voice originally of this type of information, and different people will do it on different ways, but this was a sort of a fairly standard industry-wide approach.
Sorry, what does IEG stand for? Yeah.
They don't exist anymore, so I'm just trying to remember. They were effectively a sponsorship. They were a sponsorship consulting company.
Okay.
That had been around for quite a long time in the US, and they got acquired, I think, in 2018. But they don't. Whoever they were acquired by, and it slipped my mind. They don't do the same sort of markets reports that IEG did.
The one thing, though, I would also just add is that rights holders also can develop their own methodology as well. So what Claire's presented is a great model, but for example, the last two rights holders that I worked for, when we would come up with our rights packages, they're much more subjective and would dial up certain things more than others. So I think you'll find when you look at the rights holders worldwide. You'll find some that are very buttoned up and professional, like Claire has just presented, and then others where, you know, why is this rights fee $10 million? You know, there's a lot of guesswork in how the rights are valued, and it's what a brand is willing to pay sometimes.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Erica. So true. We call it value-based pricing. So it's when if a rights holder thinks a brand's got the money, they will within reason price a package to the level that they think the brand can afford.
I think there are two
And
questions,
that's why
Claire.
you need the expert like Claire and her team to work with you to say, wait a minute, no, let's go in and let's negotiate this to get to something that's probably more realistic.
Yeah, and that I think, Erica, that's absolutely right from the brand side. And that's one of the things that when I came up earlier on with the 4 circles and we said agencies play a role, you know, sponsorship agencies exist because we understand how to do this, and we're specialist at it, and we've got experience at doing it. So, you know, I think there are brands out there that think they can do this without an agency. And there are some with very good brand in-house sponsorship managers like Erica that do know what they're doing. But, you know, for many, just as an example, I introduced Komatsu to Williams in Formula One last year, and we worked very, very closely with them to make sure they got the best package from Williams in the end. But we went through a whole process with them, with other rights holders as well. Mona, question.
Yeah, and Joseph too.
Yeah, I have quite a few questions. So this here listed under tangible assets, this access to senior personnel, is that something that is still kind of at, I'm just thinking out loud here in terms of what that means. So is that a bit of an advisory role that's added on to the contractual term, or is that something that, no?
It would be, for example, if I take Formula One again, so the team principal for Williams is James Vowles. He will be available to Williams sponsors to either speak at corporate events, to meet with customers, perhaps at a very private round table, those sorts of things. So I guess the way that's valued is how much would it cost for somebody of that caliber to be a speaker in a certain environment, and then you can put a value on that. So that's one of the reasons why that's those sorts of things are included in there.
Or
Has
using
there
the
ever been a
just jumping
moment-
in.
Sorry,
Just jumping in because only because I work in Claire's team, and actually I'm working on the Komatsu account that with James Vowles that she's referring to. We literally in 3 weeks' time have access to James Vowles, the team principal, and it will be customer client engagement, but then also PR. So actually providing the brand's PR team are comfortable, you can use them as a spokesperson, which I don't think a kind of a manufacturing company would ever have access to that kind of level of spokesperson to speak on their behalf.
Understood.
Sorry,
So it's more about public engagements and things rather than advisory, right? Because I'm coming more from an investor point of view, where if you've got access to senior management, then you have a say in the steer, for example, on marketing, or you have a steer on the brand. So that's not what that points to. But is that also considered? I mean, would big sponsors consider that? Would they consider, okay, you know, we have a way and we have a say in where your marketing campaign should be, or where your branding should land? I mean, has there ever been an exploration in a direct advisory role from sponsors in companies in sports assets?
Just trying to think of anything I know offhand, Erica. I don't know whether you can think of anything.
It depends. So, you know, thinking of like at SailGP, for example, we would bring in certain partners because of the industry that they were in, that we needed their help and their capacity to improve our product. So for example, they just raced in New York, I think last weekend. T-Mobile for Business is a sponsor of that event because they could bring in their 5G mesh cloud and really help us bring our technology up. So in that perspective, maybe there was that reverse usage of the company, the brand's expertise to bring us their products and services to help us improve our product. So their rights fee probably would be less than somebody who is just bringing a logo, but we would have hours of service for their developers and their technology people to work on our product, if that makes sense.
Understood. So that's really technical expertise and technical advisory.
Yeah.
That built in. Understood.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. The other.
Sorry, Mona, just very quickly on that, I'd say, you know, my background is technology. So I was actually very much involved in technology companies using platforms to demonstrate their products and services within a sporting environment, because it creates extra traction. So that type of environment is often used a lot more than it ever used to be.
Wonderful. Oh, that's amazing. Okay, awesome. That's really good to know. The other question I had, and we're talking about the multiplier effect, and you know, I keep hearing this, and it's a term that in a way I'm tired of hearing it, but this whole KOL conversion, right? KOL this, KOL that, and in my simple sort of analytical brain, it's like, well, how does that convert to exposure? How is that? Yes, you have 1 million followers on IG, but do I care? I mean, you may have 1 million followers locally, but what about regionally? So in terms of sponsorship, what does that mean and translate when you're looking at rights holders and they say, okay, well, we've got, you know, 15 million followers in this country and that, from a KOL perspective? Is that also needs to be applied to have this multiplier effect? So what is the benefit? I maybe I'm answering my own question, but I wanted to hear from you, Claire, if that's the way that, you know, if you're presented from a rights holder, well, we have this many followers, but then how does that translate to engagement? Is that how you would look at it?
Yeah, I think the thing is that, you know, we did this in a soccer evaluation a couple of years ago. And you know, at the end of the day, they might have this massive audience, but only a fraction of that audience may be relevant to you as the brand. And it's about how do you then deduce from that sort of massive number what is relevant to you, and how do you get to those people without sort of spending a lot of money and wastage trying to get to the others. And I think the really good thing about the opportunity that we were exploring previously, and Erica, you may be able to relate to this through Liverpool. I don't know whether they've got it the same way, but this particular football club had their database segmented. So we would have been able to actually speak to the segment that we wanted to speak to without having to speak to everybody else. And they were able to, we were able to put curated content. We would have been able, if we'd done the deal, been able to put curated content out to their specific audience that was only interested in what we had to say.
Understood. Oh, okay, very cool. Then on that note, so I see Erica's note here about KOL engagement, and that's why I was kind of hinting at that in terms of the conversion rate, and exactly what Claire, what you've explained. And so then how do you quantify engagement? Is that a very big definition? So engagement could be anything from because I hear that term as well, is that's very important for sponsors as well. So engagement, does that equal more eyeballs? Does that equal, could it be numerous factors, or?
I think it just, from a brand perspective, it depends what your objectives are as to what the measure is that you want to be tracking. And we'll talk a bit about that when we come onto the brand side in a minute. But you know, we talk about return on objectives. And if you've got a specific objective as a brand that you want to meet, then with the rights holder, you need to work out how you can track that particular measure, and what are the KPIs that are going to go into determining whether that's achieved the objective or not. And Erica, did you want to say something there as well?
Well, just to add on, I mean, it's pretty sophisticated now, as Claire said just a minute ago, about how you can segment your different audiences, and the same thing with tracking. I mean, you can put tags on all of the content and track it You can track it to conversion. You can track it to click-throughs to a microsite or to your website. You know, whatever your objective is, the digital metrics are fairly sophisticated now that you can pretty much track everything.
That's right. Okay, awesome. Great. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
No worries.
I think Joseph has a question.
Yeah, I was going to say I didn't see, there was another hand up, and I think it was Joseph, but I don't know.
Yeah, it was Joseph. Joseph?
Yeah, sorry guys. Yeah. So, hey Claire, I just wanted to ask, like you mentioned something about intangible assets, like the prestige of the property.
Hold on.
Like,
I'm just losing you there. There was a bit of background noise and I didn't hear the question.
Yeah, sorry, I'm actually in Bangkok for one of our events here. Sorry if the background noise is too loud.
Oh, it's clapping.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, I just wanted to ask, like, you know, majority of brands, you know, when they get involved in sports sponsorship, they want to be associated with like the prominent or the biggest sporting events on the planet, and they are not hesitant to pay a large fees for it. So how can smaller rights holders with, like, say, lesser popularity navigate this and, you know, convince brands to take a leap of faith with these smaller properties, you know? Yeah.
So I think it at the end of the day, it comes down to having something that the brands want. So it's really important to understand that, but I think it's also about being innovative and being creative in how you're putting rights together, and what you're putting into the rights package as you create those. So I think it's about being realistic about where you are and where you sit in the sort of scheme of things, but it's about trying to think of new and innovative ways to ensure that the brands have access to your audiences, that you're offering things that are maybe different to other rights holders, and just really trying to differentiate yourself in that respect.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No worries. Well, that was a good slide for a good discussion, wasn't it? Any other questions before we move on? No. So this is really about attribute matching. So when you're a rights holder and you're thinking about who are the sponsors, who are the brands, or which are the brands that are going to be sort of right for your particular property. And one of the things that we do is called attribute matching. So you're looking at the audience, you're looking at the objectives, and you're looking at the attributes and values of the brands that are out there. So, you know, one of the things that rights holders can offer to brands is an audience that perhaps the brand wants to be engaged with, in order to create maybe a halo effect or to expand their brand, or they want to be seen in good company and they perceive that the rights holder has the company that they want to be keeping. So all these things need to be taken into consideration as a rights holder when you think you're going to be doing outward bound sales of sponsorship. So where is it that you're likely to go? And the best place is where the potential with the audience and the objectives and the attributes match. So one of the first things that I would say in this respect is consider the industry categories for which your sponsorship platform and your property would be a good fit. And so you know, there are lots of different industries out there, and which are the ones that make the most sense for you to engage with. So once you think about the industry, then look at all the brands within that industry, and then select some brands that you would like to be going after. And then you need to research those brands really deeply. You need to understand what they're investing in currently. What, you know, I would in this respect go to the investor relations page on their website. You look at what their projections are in terms of what are their key markets, where do they want to be going, what do they want to be doing in terms of their vision for the brand. over the next 3 to 5 years. And then perhaps you can think about how your property can help them fulfill certain objectives, whether it's geographic objectives, whether it's market reach, in terms of audiences, different things like that. So really thinking about how your property works with certain industries and then with the brands within those categories. I think it's also understanding what you need as a rights holder. Perhaps, you know, maybe you've got hospitality, maybe you need a food and beverage partner in order to try and reduce some of the costs that you're having to outlay in terms of running events or running a stadium or whatever it may be. So it's also thinking about going back to the packages, and we had, you know, official suppliers and official partners. Where are the brands that can actually help you save hard dollars in order to by taking value, what we call value in kind. So you're taking the products and services from the brand to reduce your overheads and your outgoings. So once you've identified your industries and identified some brands, then the ideal thing is to secure a meeting. Now this takes, I think they say on average, it takes 8 approaches to a given brand to actually secure a meeting. It's not for the faint-hearted. That's why there are specialists that do sponsorship sales. And it's somebody that's got to have a pretty thick skin, because you've got to keep going, and patience is really important. But once you've managed to engage the sponsorship or the brand, then you need to develop a bespoke proposition for each brand, because each brand will be different. So that's why the research into the brand and understanding their key drivers and things is so important when you put a proposition out. Gone are the days when vanilla sponsorship propositions worked. So it just doesn't work anymore. So then the next part would be to be able to get in and present the proposal. Hopefully you get in, have a good meeting. They've given you some information and some feedback. I mean, this is an iterative process, so it's like multiple meetings, but you will go through a process, and each time you're refining the proposal down to what the brand needs. And hopefully at some point they say, yes, they want to go ahead. And then you can negotiate on the price. So you'll have given them a price for certain rights. And one of the things that agencies like us do with a rights holder and with a brand is to help the brand understand whether the rights are right for them in terms of what they're trying to achieve with their marketing mix and their marketing objectives. So we would maybe suggest that certain things are taken out of the package, certain things are put into the package. So that's the negotiation, both on the package itself and on the price. And then once that gets to a point where you feel that you're in a sort of fairly solid place with the brand, then you'd actually provide a draft sponsorship contract that would go to their legal team. There'll be some backwards and forth. And actually, one of the things we say later on is that takes a surprisingly long time. And then obviously you're entering into the legal process with both companies, and hopefully finally you get to a point where the sponsorship could be announced. Peggy?
Yeah, so this is interesting because I was just doing a proposal yesterday. My question, my question is, so I did some research on that, but it's not a cold lead. That's why it's easier. But I can imagine if it's an entirely cold lead. My question is, what are the information that you would like to, for example, right, for the brand? So normally I'll go to the website, their company website, and read their values and profile and stuff like that. What other information do you think we should get, and how do we get it?
So I think their annual report, which is often in the investors section of their website, you can download it. Often gives a lot of really good information for you to understand, you know, what the sort of long-term objectives are and things like that. They were saying. I guess the other thing is just doing general searches on the brand. To make sure that you understand the places that they're playing and everything about them as much as you can. Erica, did you have something there to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I get approached on a daily basis by rights holders, and I think 8 approaches is probably, for me, it's probably even more before you get in the door. But the biggest difference is, as both Claire and Peggy are saying, is to understand the brand, but understand the problem that they're trying to solve with this sponsorship. Because again, if they can just buy advertising, then, why would they do a sponsorship? If they're trying to solve a problem, Claire was mentioning earlier about technology companies, or I was mentioning with T-Mobile, they're trying to demonstrate their new product offering. Maybe a brand has a problem entering a certain market or territory, or they're going to launch a new brand. Like, really try to find out, and this is the hard part because you can't find that on the website, but you can maybe find it in articles, talking to people, doing the legwork. You have to do the legwork to find out what is the problem. Because if someone comes in with a vanilla presentation, I shut off. But if you come in and say, listen, I know your problem is this, or I think your problem is this, here's what we can do for you. It might not be perfect, but at least you've probably gotten my attention now, and I'll be more likely to give you information to really let you know what I'm trying to solve is. So when you come back to me, you can nail it. So take some risks with trying to figure out what the problem is, but then keep refining it. Because once you've got their attention, it's easier to get that information from them. It's much harder when you come in cold. Why am I going to give you my marketing plan? I'm not going to tell you what my problems are. I need to know that there's a benefit for me.
Yeah, totally. Thanks, Erica. Question somewhere? No. Answered the one, sorry, I wasn't looking over there just now. Okay, let's go on to brands. So if you're a brand, why do sponsorships matter to brands? So over the years, so I ran my own business for 22 years until we got acquired last year by Revolution, and we use this this diagram quite a lot to talk to brands about why sponsorship was important to them. It's about reputation, it's about relationships, and it's about revenue. So I think that's where sponsorship is a really strong tool for brands to use in their marketing, because it does multiple things under the one umbrella. So reputation is all obviously about brand building. It's about awareness. It's about changing the perception of the brand. It's about creating credibility, affinity, advocacy, and salience around those things. And I think we'll talk a bit about measurement, but basically, quite often brands do brand awareness surveys. But there are a lot of things that sponsorship influence as well around the brand. In addition to just the awareness. The other thing is about relationships. So this is about building relationships with the audiences, and it's about the reputation. So it's about customers and prospects. It's about engaging with channels. Quite often certainly in the tech space, vendors such as an IBM would bring their channel partners as well as their end customers to events. So it allows them to build relationships across the business. It allows you to engage employees. We used to, when I was at Nortel and in-house, we used to bring our employees to the Friday of Formula One races in the countries where we were, to give employees an opportunity to engage with the sponsorship, to get them engaged and get them on board and get them excited about what we were doing. Media, analysts, all those different audiences that can be targeted with the sponsorship. And revenue, one of the biggest things is around driving revenue and increasing sales for many brands. And that's obviously one of the key drivers for engaging in a sponsorship. But one of the things that we've seen is that sponsorship can increase the value of deals, it can increase the volume, it can increase the velocity of a brand being able to sell to their target customer. The conversion can be higher. They can actually perhaps even increase the portfolio of a particular brand's products, and it allows them to have direct and indirect sales. So direct sales could be to the property itself, and then you've got indirect sales that are generated as a result of the marketing that goes around the sponsorship. So really sponsorship helps brands to achieve key business objectives, and effectively the business objectives should be supported by the marketing objectives, and the marketing objectives should be supported by the sponsorship objectives. So it cascades. Am I missing a question from somebody that I'm not seeing here? We're okay. Sponsorship strengths. I mean, we've talked a little bit about this during some of the things that we've talked about already, but you know, there are multiple reasons why brands use sponsorship. And I said this back along, it's not to replace advertising, but it actually creates, it's about the passion points. It's about engaging the emotions of your audience. And, you know, you see a lot of things where rights holders will say that brands that are associated with certain properties, the customers or the end users, the customers, I guess, for want of a better word, are more likely to buy a brand that's associated with something that they're passionate about. So it does have an impact. It does have a real benefit to the brands. And you know, sometimes for smaller brands, sponsorship allows them to have a halo effect. Because they get so many rights, because they're almost piggybacking on the back of something that's much larger than they are, or much more sort of attractive to their target audience, it allows them to be able to benefit from that halo effect. And sponsorship process. So if you're a brand, what's the process that you need to go to think about sponsorship? I guess the first thing is you actually decide that you want to have sponsorship as part of your marketing mix, and you see a value of sponsorship. And I think, you know, this is what we've seen, that more and more brands are deciding to engage and use sponsorship as part of their marketing mix. But it starts with developing the right strategy. So what is the sponsorship strategy? First of all, there needs to be a sponsorship policy and a selection framework. How are you going to choose a sponsorship? What's going to be the right thing for the brand? What are the objectives that the sponsorship is going to address, and why are you getting involved with a certain rights holder? What's going to be the outcome of that for the brand? What's the activation? So the activation is, you know, if you just pay for a sponsorship and you don't do anything with it, you might as well buy advertising. But the sponsorship assets allow you to activate in a certain way, which therefore amplifies the right that you've got, that you're buying. So you need to make sure that you actually have an activation plan. And, you know, if you just pay for the sponsorship rights and you don't activate it, or you don't have any budget to activate it, then you're really missing the opportunity. But budget control is also really important. You know, activation, I mean, they used to say 3 to 1, so that if you invested $1 in a rights fee, you should be investing $3 in the activation budget. I think certainly with digital, that perhaps has maybe slimmed down a little bit. But, you know, it still needs a decent budget to activate. Otherwise, it really just doesn't do the sponsorship justice. And rights holders want to partner with brands that are actually activating and being proactive and demonstrating how they're using the sponsorship. And then this is all brought together through evaluation, so targeted tracking, and then an exit plan for when the sponsorship comes to an end. So in many cases, longevity in sponsorships is important. You know, a 1-year deal doesn't often cut it, because you're still trying to get things up and running. 2-3 year deals obviously give more strength to the overall program. And, you know, you see sponsors that have been around in some things for absolutely forever, like, you know, IBM in Wimbledon, for example, to be topical this week. You know, that's a really long-standing partnership they've had for decades. Peggy, you had a question?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question about, and I remember having a discussion with Erica before, sponsorship versus partnership. And I also believe that you cannot do anything within 1 year, right? It needs to be a longer term. So it has to be maybe a bit less transactional sometimes and a little bit more transformational. My next question to Claire is, if you just kind of shared that the activation budget should be 1:3. But if I'm only getting $10,000 my sponsorship, why would I activate 3 times? Did I hear it wrongly, or is there? Yeah.
No. So as the brand, you're paying. Say you're paying $10,000 for rights, and so. But basically, what rights give you is the opportunity to amplify. So basically, by then I mean, every brand is different, but it used to be the industry average used to be 1 to 3. So then you spend 30,000 on top of your 10,000, which means you're spending 40,000, but your return should be multiple times that investment. So that's the way that it should work. Erica, did you want to add something there?
The only thing I would say, Peggy, to your point about always trying for the 3-year, the long term, that would be the goal. But as some of you out there are smaller rights holders, to some of the questions you had before, you don't always have the track record to be able to do that. So you may take a deal today that in 5 years you wouldn't take, because you need to get the sponsors in, you need to do things, you need to test and learn. And you know, that $10,000 today may help you a lot rather than passing it up. So if you're Formula One, you're probably not going to take a 1-year deal. But if you're a small startup rights holder, you can be more creative, because again, if you bring somebody in for a $10,000 deal, but they spend $30,000 to activate it, that's $30,000 advertising your property. So you want to get to what we're talking about, but you can take some risks in the early stages if you're a startup or a smaller property.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Mona, got a question?
Yeah, and thank you, Erica, for bringing that up, because I want to pile on top of that. My question was about exactly that. So for startup rights holders, does this process also apply? So I hear about the 3-to-1 ratio, probably not, but everything else, the planning, and it's so important for startups who are I'm working with one right now where they're in the growth phase. And I'm trying to discipline them to think, okay, you've got to set the stage correctly so that you are positioned for growth. And one of those things is developing the right strategy around the vision and how to execute. And so I believe that this is actually one aspect that they are missing, and even their marketing and branding plan, because it's always been reactionary. And I think you'll find that a lot with startups, small companies, it's all reactionary. So you get the 10K in, you get the 5K in, and then you learn from it, and then you develop it later. But this company is in a position now where I think they need to get their legs going. And I wanted to ask the question of this process. Is it the right time when they're at that growth stage? Is this the right time to develop this strategy and process and everything? Is this the right moment to do that?
Yeah, so this is from the brand perspective, Mona, that we're talking about this process. You know, Sharon, I'm sure you don't mind me talking about the fact that we're working together, and actually we're going through this as a rights holder right now, and we're working through this, and I think, you know, when you get to the stage where you need to generate income as a rights holder, then in order to expand, then you have to start looking at how you're going to generate that revenue. And, you know, is it investors? Is it sponsorship? How's it going to come in? And I don't think that there is a point where it's too early for you to consider that, as long as you've got rights that are of interest to a brand.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
No worries. Okay, I'm conscious that we're at the top of the hour, which is how long we were meant to be, but we started a bit late. So if people need to drop, I understand. If you want to stay, you're obviously very welcome. But I'll try and move more quickly through the rest of it. Sponsorship policy, we've just talked about that. Really, it's about what are the processes and things that need to go into looking at sponsorship, and what, you know, you're in a corporate environment as a brand, and what is the policy that you're going to apply in order to deal with sponsorship. So, you know, the regulations and this is probably for a bigger brand, but I think even for a smaller brand, you just need to be aware of operationally how sponsorship going to work. And so this is just something to consider. And then policy, just go through the headings really quickly. Situation analysis, where are you as a brand? Where are you currently in your growth phase, and so on and so forth? What are the management processes that need to be understood in order for the sponsorship to be able to be acquired and run and managed? What are the objectives? And going back to Erica's point, what is the challenge that the brand is facing, that the sponsorship is being taken to resolve, or to help, or to help you to grow in a certain way? Financial accountability, looking at the size of the budget, some sponsorships are very large, as we know, and it's sort of what are the internal accounting systems that need to be put in place in order to manage that, to make it work properly, and different other considerations, corporate requirements, restrictions on partnership activity. So this is one of the, no political affiliations, no likelihood of controversy. Some have no alcohol, different things like that. So it's the sort of the exclusions as well. And then what's the evaluation and review cycle going to be in the process for that, to make sure that the money's that's being invested is actually being used correctly. So very quickly on to sponsorship strategy. So that's the policy. Sponsorship strategy is the instruction book. So the policy is the rule book, and the strategy is the instruction book. So the instruction book is really about how are you going to make all this work, and how are you going to bring it to life. So sponsorship strategy really talks about background of the company, other marketing activities, where this sponsorship is going to fit in, all about corporate brand and image, the mission statement for the company and the brand, and where the sponsorship is going to play into that, the objectives. So as I said, we talk about return on objectives. So most people think about return on investment, but it's not always about an investment. It could be other things. It could be about growing an audience. It could be something that is not actually a financial number, that is the investment. So that's why we talk about return on objectives in a sponsorship space. Talk about target audiences. What are the key messages that are going to be communicated, and identify the ideal areas of sponsorship. What would resonate with the audience that you're trying to talk to, and your particular audience as well. And then going on to other things, the impact of existing sponsorship portfolio. I've got a little bit in a minute that talks about portfolio. So when you've got more than one sponsorship, how do you make sure that the sponsorships fit together and they're doing different things? So you have different sponsorships for different reasons, and you need to make sure that it's cohesive within a strategy. Timetable, identifying the budgets, and human resources. What are the the in-house sponsorship resources that you need in order to make it work? Evaluation criteria, and who are the key stakeholders, who are the decision makers, and any dependencies that you might have within that whole piece. Another thing, just very briefly to consider, crisis management. Within any brand, there needs to be a crisis management plan, a crisis communications plan, and around sponsorship, there may be other things that need to go into that. Formula One, what happens if there's an accident? What happens if a driver is injured? What's the company stance on that? You need to be ready to put that into action. Just very quickly on the portfolio piece, this just gives you an example here. Sponsorship 1, sponsorship 2, sponsorship 3, different sponsorships talking to different personas within the audience and target audience that you're wanting to attract, and then different sponsorships perhaps target different geographies, and you perhaps take some regional sponsorships in order to talk to regional audiences. But this gives you just some example of how you could perhaps plot a sponsorship portfolio so that you make sure that you're addressing all the audiences, all the geographies, and the sort of messages and the themes that you may need to cover. Very briefly, this is, I actually had this whole section in and I took it out because I realized that we were going to run out of time. But property selection. So you need to sort of think about basic assessment procedures. You know, what are you going to think about in terms of the selection of the property that you're going to go to? Is it a good fit with the brand? What's their sponsorship history? Do they treat sponsors well? Are they reasonable? Are there any things that may ring alarm bells? What's your selection criteria? And what's the sponsorship contract length? And going back to Erica's point just now, from a rights holder, you may be willing to sell a 1-year deal in order to get somebody in. And then that gives you some kudos that you can actually show that you can actually work with partners and things like that. Value assessment framework. So we look at value from multiple angles: the strategic value of the partnership, the brand value, the market value, media value, and the rights value. So rights value is only one element of the overall consideration when you're actually looking the valuation of a property from a brand's perspective. And then this just goes into a little bit about negotiation. We won't go through this in detail, but basically, having found the property, you then obviously need to go into negotiation process, which we talked a little bit about from the rights holder side earlier on. And then obviously fees, to make sure that the fees are obviously, or the understanding of the fees is correct, and also that any things like win bonuses and things like that that may be put in are considered as part of the overall contract, and you know, make sure that from a budgeting perspective you can afford to pay the win bonuses and things like that. So sometimes it can significantly enhance the cost of a package, so you need to be aware of those permutations. And then some considerations on the contracting timing, exclusivity. Make sure that as a brand, you don't really want to be having other people in the same industry as you being contracted by the rights holder. So category exclusivity means the rights are probably more expensive, but it means that you have that industry specific for you. So you don't have competing brands in your space. Considerations of value in kind, different things that may be applicable, obviously terms and termination, and any considerations for dispute, how those disputes are going to be handled, what country of law those disputes will be handled within. So just a few pointers. And then very, very quickly, just about sponsorship activation. When you start a sponsorship, what you would normally do is to benchmark where you are. So research and measurement starts out as probably one of the key things, that you want to know where you're starting from so that you can know where you're going to end up and where you're going to finish. Using data, obviously, you know, becoming increasingly important these days. Creative strategy. So when we look at sponsorship, I've always thought about this in this way, is 360 activation. So you've got rights that you can activate through different elements, but live events, PR and comms, content production, you know, in this day and age where social and digital is so much more prevalent, content is king, in terms of being able to make sure that you are creating that content flow to your target audiences through all the various different channels that you may be using. Hospitality and VIP hospitality, obviously a way to engage audiences in person. So there's the sort of remote way, and then there's the in-person way. And then obviously media services is also around, you know, putting the sponsorship into a media context as well, whether that's advertising, whether that's PR and comms. So that's a very brief look at activation. And then the last thing, as I say, you would normally start with benchmarking. My first job out of university was with HP, and we used to have a phrase that said, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And I think that's absolutely true. I think it was Dave Hewlett that coined that phrase that seemed to stick. But yeah, measurement is obviously very critical in terms of making sure you're getting the value out of your sponsorship deal and making sure you're leveraging it to the maximum. And that's the end of it.
Awesome. I mean, judging by the number of questions that I didn't kind of like, put them in, but they all came in so authentically. So thank you so much. Claire, that's so much information. And Erica for also piping in. You are a duo show, right?